Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a religious recovery consultant and a registered professional counselor. And I'm very pleased today to have a Twitter friend of mine joining us from the United States. Her name is Shirley Fessel. Shirley Fessel is a religious domestic abuse survivor advocate. She has her master's in counseling and a master's in education from Wichita State University. Raised Catholic, Shirley sees women's spiritual equality as a global challenge. Her late husband was a Baptist minister, and he did suffer from a mental illness. Shirley's workbook, Redemption from Biblical Battering, is a self-help workbook for abused women of faith, which provides a faith-based path to freedom from spiritual and domestic abuse. Shirley, welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Janice.
It's really nice to finally get to see you and chat with you in real time, since we're usually just going back and forth on Twitter. From the time that you first contacted me, I was really intrigued by the work that you do as a religious domestic abuse survivor advocate. And I think our listeners will be really interested to know some of your journey, a little bit of how you got to be in this position that you're in today. You can start us off in your childhood if you like.
Oh, great. Well, I was always kind of defiant and an independent thinker. And as early as 12, I knew that the Catholic faith I was raised in was not accurate or not helpful to me as a woman. There was no place for me as a woman. And I got kind of excited about the Vatican II. It raised some hopes, but then I saw that was just going to be a cosmetic attempt to placate people. And so then I met the Baptist minister, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to advance. I'm going to be going into this Bible-based, thing that's going to be more about my individual relationship with God, because I'd had a fallout with a priest who told me, that he had to come between me and God, and it was like, who are you? So, but I found out that it shares the same legalism. And as I've grown and researched, and I have to admit I'm a slow learner. I was 50 before I realized that globally religion is used as a tool to keep women oppressed and controlled. And so this is by no means limited to the Christian organized religions. Unfortunately, we just saw a tragic death of a woman in Iran for a ridiculous attempt to control her body. And of course, she was part of the oppressed minority of the Kurds. And so this just goes on and on and on. Actually, as part of the marriage, I also looked into a lot of denominations, studied their work, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness. I was a Presbyterian elder. I mean, there wasn't Nazarene. There weren't many I didn't visit.
Wow.
And in all of them, there was no place for me. If I didn't want to cook and serve in the kitchen, if I didn't want to be a Sunday school teacher, if I didn't want to be in the choir, there was no place for me to use my gifts. And I was in college. I studied theology and philosophy for 4 years. I was an exceptional student. I got rave feedback from the professors, but it didn't matter, because I wasn't endowed with, I don't want to be vulgar, but because I wasn't endowed with the correct equipment physically, I wasn't going to be taken seriously. So after the divorce, I did not raise my children in any organized religion. I felt that would create dissension and promote judgmentalism, and I didn't want to teach that to my children.
Did you stay married? Did you stay married a long time after having children? I know a lot of Christian women say, well, they shouldn't leave their abuser. That's the way that they feel. And I don't know the situation of your marriage, if there was abuse involved or not. But did you stay married for a long time because of religious reasoning?
Actually, I never thought it was okay. But the trauma, the dynamic of abuse, you are isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the problems. Even the women in the church were not going to help me. It's the woman shunning. It's the old Eve story, that allows the man to get off. Why I stayed as long as I did, because I kept trying to figure out what was going on. Mm-hmm. He wasn't a drug addict. He didn't drink. He didn't, it just like, what is this? I had never encountered anything like this. And of course, now I know that there are several psychoses that feature religious grandiosity. Mm-hmm. And if anyone wants to look into, even if there's no psychosis, there is an addiction to religion that is, it does follow the addictive pattern that Father Leo Booth points out in his books, When God Becomes a Drug. And that was helpful to me. But I am so old that there was nothing about domestic abuse when I came along. And actually, I was leaving at the time that Lenore Walker came out with her book on battering. So, and I think Marie Fortune founded Faith Trust Institute to battle abuse within the church in 1976, which was when my daughter was born.
Okay.
So we had always thought I would have a third child, but I had decided I was not going to have the third child. And so after I stopped trying to understand it and I stopped trying to fix him, then it took me a while, of course, to get my ducks in a row because he cleaned out all the money. So anyway, I left when my daughter was a year and a half old. My last daughter was a year and a half old.
Wow.
And left with no money, and didn't matter. The fact that my children could sleep in peace was everything. And also I was very concerned about my son, who was 11 at the time. And if anybody believes the lie that you want your kids to grow up with a father, well, a father who creates that kind of anger in the son, where the son thinks about killing his father or rising up against his father.
Wow.
You don't want your child to go through that. And so there's a myth that he's a good dad for the kids, even if he abuses the mother. No, if the children see a husband abusing his wife, he is not a good father. I don't care. So that cherished ideal has to go by the wayside.
Wow,
that's just another one of the myths promoted to keep men in power. That's all that is.
Yes. And so did you see or experience the abuse becoming worse and worse as time went on? And was he couching it in religious terms, that you and the children were his property and he was your spiritual head and he could do whatever he wanted to
Always. And that's what as I said, I'm a slow learner. So I took things from the counseling masters and I took things from the communication masters to help me sort out what was going on. And so I had the benefit of being strengthened in place. And I believe women can be strengthened in place. Yes, you have to heal and do therapy and do everything, all the PTSD and stuff afterwards. But you can be strengthened in place by uncovering these 7 levels of confusion that you are being put through very deliberately. It's a choice. And so I liken the people's outrage or people's pretense that they're shocked by what's going on in the organized church today, in the Catholic and the Southern Baptist and any place else you find it. It's a similar situation with domestic violence or domestic abuse. And so many women tell me, I'm not abused, but and you are totally isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And the people in the church that are being abused are shunned and removed,
Mm-hmm.
because, as we know, the creed is no divorce, no matter what, which is another idea to keep the man in charge. A woman must be in control by man. She must be supervised or whatever by a man.
Wow.
None of these dictums that hold women in place have any relationship to her own faith or her own spiritual growth or relationship with God. They are all patriarchy. They are all in place to keep the woman under some man's control.
Mm-hmm. And when you were, even though abuse was ongoing in that marriage, in your home, you didn't find support within the church. You didn't receive support from other women. You didn't receive support from other church members or board members. You couldn't even really talk about it, I imagine.
No, and it's the same today. It has not improved. I'm friends with an advocate in the Southern Baptist Church who was assaulted in the early 90s as a missionary. And if you know, the missionaries are the cream of the crop in Southern Baptist churches. And she has been advocating since the early 90s, because she and her husband lost their positions when she reported it. They had to go home. Her children had to come out of this missionary school. They had to come home and start a whole new life, because it's just not allowed. The woman will always be cast aside or thrown under the bus. And even with the faith saving that's going on now, the substance is not there. You will still hear victims and advocates and survivors so disappointed that it's always about image. It's always about saving face. And that's because of the money. When you have a system where the head, the pastor, is reliant on the goodwill of the people for his income, you will not have truth-telling. You will not have an interest in helping the suffering within your congregation. And if she's a woman, it's going to be her fault no matter what.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so you were able, amazingly and wonderfully, to extricate yourself from that abusive situation, that abusive marriage, to save yourself and save your children, because you recognized nobody else was coming along to save you or rescue you. If there was anything that was going to be done, you would have to be the one to do it. And you left, and presumably you had to start over again.
Yes, and I left with no, as I said, my husband. At that time, I taught, and our summer, all of our checks for the summer were sent in one lump sum. I had a separate account for that money, and he went and talked to Teller out of giving him that money. So we came up with nothing. This was in Kansas, and we came up to Kansas City and started over. But if the surprise and the shock and all these reactions within the church, I don't really see them as valid, because it's the same situation. Everyone knows it goes on, but no one has the courage to step up and advocate in spite of what the leaders taught that they say they're involved in. So they are very isolated. They're extremely isolated. And my work is, when I wrote it, was meant to reach the isolated woman, because she doesn't have a lot of other places to go. They will tell her, don't go to counseling because they'll ruin your faith. They don't want her reaching out because, again, of their concern over the image of the church, which is the core of their fundraising. So I don't mean to say it's everywhere, but it is pretty much everywhere. Most of the really egregious stories, even of murder and love triangles and things like that you read, people say, oh, this is an exception. This is an exception. No, this grew out of an endemic approach and a false narrative about what faith means. And so it's not anything exceptional. It's just swept under the rug. But I do think the conservative churches, or the ones that don't require any training whatsoever, like my husband started out as a Disciples of Christ. No, he was a Baptist. Then he went to Disciples of Christ, and that oversight was too much for him. So he went to Independent Christian, where he could just more or less be a law unto himself.
That's right.
And that it is more prominent in those churches. However, there is no denomination that you won't have Bible and faith ideas used to control the woman in the home.
Right.
It's everywhere.
That's right.
Even,
not to mention narcissistic leaders, narcissistic people, predators rising up in leadership positions.
And once, I can't remember who said it, but she made a great point. It's in the book about the church conditions women to be perfect victims of these people.
Yes.
Forgive.
Yeah, and don't speak ill of them. Don't speak poorly of them. It's really a double bind that women are absolutely. Oppressed and silenced. So then when you left, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say the reason that I do this is because people think it's an individual problem behind a closed door. But if there were ever a number of women lined up, you would see the magnitude of the problem. In the Southern Baptist Church, you had 800 cases that you know of. Okay. So it's not this church. It's not just this marriage. It's not just, it's part of the culture that says it's okay. Because people always say, why don't you leave? People never ask, why does he act this way? Why does he think it's okay to act this way?
Right. Yeah, the blame goes on to the victim.
And people do not understand that the time of leaving is the most dangerous time.
Yes.
Her being subject to being killed goes up 70% when she leaves.
Wow, 70%.
And my own husband, and it's hard for people to wrap their minds around this if they have the image of the pastor. But my husband chased us across the street and said he would kill us before the police got there.
Oh, that's so
and
terrible.
And he would cut me up into little pieces. Now, my children are listening to this. He would cut me up into little pieces before the police got there.
Oh, my heart.
This is a minister.
Wow.
And so these kinds of realities create such cognitive dissonance in people that they can't wrap their mind around it. And I was pleased when the Southern Baptists did post some of the pictures of the men because they look like really nice guys.
Yeah.
And when a guy is in a pulpit with all that authority and power, people can't get their mind around it. So it must be the woman's fault.
Right. Wow. So you were able to pretty much escape with your children, start your new life, really against all odds. How long then was it for you to come up with your workbook, Redemption from Biblical Battering? Was this something that went on over years? You put the pieces together in your mind. Were you even able to recognize that what you had been suffering was truly abuse?
Well, I knew I'd been suffering abuse, and I was very concerned about what it was doing to the children.
Yeah.
But after the abuse, you don't just pick up right away. It took me 10 years to climb out financially.
Yes.
One of my children developed a mental illness from the abuse. And then my youngest, I got her out. She didn't go through any of that, but she had her own anxieties and things. So I didn't honor, the real truth is, I was buried in trying to raise the children and work. But I didn't honor my original gift of writing. I had always written for other people. I'd always written, proposals and grants and articles and things for other people. But then I started looking at the literature, what was available. And I see that this is a cusp issue. And by that, I mean, it's just as unknown as domestic abuse used to be unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the sexual abuse by clergy and church people is media worthy because of the sexual reference.
Right.
Everyone's ears perk up.
Right.
But they don't understand that in religious domestic abuse, you're going to have sexual abuse, you're going to have child abuse.
Mm-hmm.
It's all there. Yeah. And if they could get the courage to understand that 1 in 4 women in the church is in a situation like this, it may not be as extreme. Many women say to me, well, he never hit me. That's a goal, like that's a high point.
Wow.
So, but the abuse is there. Mm-hmm. Women are shackled in their minds and hearts over the idea that they must serve these men. Mm-hmm. They must serve. That is their whole calling in life, is to serve.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they don't serve themselves, because that would be selfish or faithless or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But this brainwashing, this manipulation rivals that used in concentration camp, prisoners of war camps, cults. It doesn't matter whether the abuse is an individual, a group, or an organization. The tactics are the same. Mm-hmm. Anyone that looks at any of the activities of oppressive groups will see the same attacks on the mind, the same demoralization on the soul. And when it's spiritual, the woman is affected at an even deeper level, if that's possible. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I didn't see any workbooks out there for the woman herself.
Right.
So I think now there's one other person that may have a workbook out. But at the time, so I thought if I could put this complex, subtle, hard to understand web of oppression that uses God and the Bible, if I could make this clear, and the woman could, in the privacy of her own home, work through these steps and these levels, she can decide then, what am I doing?
Yes.
What am I doing? And do I have the right to do something different? And what does this have to do with my relationship with God?
Yes. And that's what I find so interesting and important about your work, is that this workbook provides a faith-based path to freedom from spiritual and domestic abuse. So you're not going in there telling these women who are, presumably deeply devoted to their faith, they love Jesus or whatever the situation is, their deity that they're worshiping. And so you're trying to reach them within that context and talk to them and let them know it's not okay to be abused and to be oppressed and suffering. And you're using language and verses, I guess, that are familiar to them to help them along their journey out of this abusive situation. So that's a really unique and interesting way to go about it. And you mentioned earlier, I think 7 layers of confusion, or what is it? What can you tell us some more about your workbook?
Well, the first thing is the woman does not think she doesn't even recognize abuse. Mm-hmm. I had to call a hotline and ask, he did this, is that abuse?
Right.
Because you're put in a confusion where you doubt everything. You don't have a reliable reference to reality.
And there's a lot of gaslighting.
All this language is now available. It was not available at the time.
Exactly.
So the first level is, am I being abused? Mm. And then if she admits she's being abused, she'll wonder, do I deserve it? Have I done something worthy of this? Which, of course, the abuser's glad to say yes. Mm-hmm. And then after she realizes, no, not really. This is where the teaching will swoop in and say, maybe you can help him.
Right.
You, as the faithful church believer, can help save his soul. Mm-hmm. And of course, the devil is the best scapegoat ever. And, well, you got two scapegoats. You got a godly scapegoat and you got a devil scapegoat, so you're covered,
Mm-hmm.
But after she realizes that this is a prideful position, in that faith, the Holy Spirit works with people. You are not in a position to do what only the Holy Spirit and that person can do.
Okay.
Not your job. So step out of that and realize this is conscious, it's deliberate, it's something between him and his God. It is not your job nor your power to save him. And start looking at, what do I need to redefine? What do I need to get another reality-based term for?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the communication exercises come in, where you see the games that are used. The first tool is charting, where you can step back and see the patterns. When you're so deeply buried, you can't see the patterns. Mm-hmm. But if you start charting the behavior, you will see, oh, every time I say A, he says B.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Every time I tell him a verse, well, my husband said I didn't have the right to quote a verse to him because it wasn't respectful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Boy, oh boy.
And so he used to say I needed help communicating. I'm an English major. I need help communicating. And what he meant by that was, yes, dear. Yes, dear.
Right. That was
but it was too late because I'd already been in the master's program looking at communication games.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it goes on from there for you to sort out, what layers, what tasks do you have? What healing areas will you have to? Because another person told me what they liked about the workbook was it recognizes it's not over if you leave.
Right.
Work, tremendous work remains for you.
Mm-hmm.
The children and yourself, you've been through war, basically. You're a veteran of domestic war, and you need a lot. And it doesn't happen quickly, it takes years.
And particularly if the abuser remains involved in the situation. So you've been able to flee with your children, but maybe the courts demand that the abuser still has some kind of access to the children. I was so blessed
because he was not interested. And of course, that really wounded the youngest. Yeah. Where's daddy, Mm-hmm. But it was so much easier to raise them by myself. Mm-hmm. It was so much easier.
Mm-hmm. And then you still had to unpick all your own conditioning that had taken place during the marriage and during your time attached to fundamentalism to figure out how was it acceptable to me that this person treat me this way, and figure out all your own PTSD and complex PTSD that grew out of that situation.
Well, and I do think, I was raised Catholic, and I do think the teaching of the church combined with the conditioning of women to, my mother wanted to protect me by encouraging me not to get a divorce.
Yes.
They'll always do that because they're concerned about the social image and because the prevailing idea is you have to have a man to make it. So too many family and friends not understanding will pressure the woman not to leave.
Did you have any family support when you left? Did your mom or anybody from your family understand?
I was 1,100 miles away, but it wouldn't have mattered because my mother was not able in her own self to help anyway.
Mm-hmm.
My sisters were not able. Our family was not supportive. They didn't know how to support each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wouldn't have mattered anyway. My mother wasn't able to help my sisters with their children, and she would always have taken the side of the husband.
Right.
Because that's the conditioning.
Yep, that's what she was primed for.
He must have had a bad day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's got a lot of stress at work. Can't you do something to help calm him down?
Right.
In the church, you're told pray more, believe more, love more.
That's right.
Forgive and of course, more. Now I found out they'd say if you had more sex, like the biblical, the believing woman who meets the husband at the door wrapped in cellophane. Yeah. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And a relationship by definition is two people. You cannot by yourself make a one-way marriage work.
Mm-hmm.
But all these, as I said, all these pressures will continue to. And that's when I realized that the organized church was basically a male bastion upholding male power. So you mentioned that at one point it was helpful for you to contact a helpline and be able to ask, is this abuse? Is there anything, can you share anything that was surprising or that you think might be surprising or helpful that falls under the category of abuse that religious women or any woman might not recognize? I mean, I know there can be withholding of finances or controlling manipulation of finances can definitely fall under the category of abuse. Probably two of the most subtle forms. If you notice that every time you have an idea, he always has a better one.
Mm-hmm.
And another one is always couching what he wants to do in terms of his concern for you. Controlling your movements, controlling who you relate to. I just don't think she's a good friend for you.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want you to go to work because you're needed at the home with the children. It's just they have a million ways that the bottom line is the same thing. You can't honor your own thoughts and feelings. You can't do what you need to do. However, there's a twist to this I want to bring to the women's attention, and that is my husband was very clever, and he pretended to support me in getting the education because it would mean more money for him to control. So on the surface, people would say, oh, you're so lucky to have such a supportive husband.
Mm.
He watches the baby for you while you go to class.
Mm.
Of course, everybody thought he was wonderful, which they always do.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't know that he just wanted me to be able to earn more money because he took all the money I earned for 10 years.
Wow.
And as a person who grew up in the Catholic Church, I didn't value money or material things. It was no problem for me because I was supporting the ministry.
Right. Wow. And
so it's so thorough. The conditioning is so thorough and subtle. Mm-hmm. And the people around you have the same conditioning.
Yes.
So,
wow.
You can only talk to people. You won't find anyone who understands it until you talk to people who have been through it.
Yes. Oh, yes, that's so true. I find that all the time working with clients recovering from religious trauma and religious trauma syndrome. Unless the therapist has a similar background, it's very, very hard for them to relate because it's so pervasive. Really
and so subtle
into every
and so
part.
Complex.
Yeah,
it's a maze. It's a maze.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the readers said that we really appreciated how I just laid it out so clearly I kind of untangled the webs, untangled the strands.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not too much. Each chapter's not too much to deal with. And you can go at your own pace, or you can start anywhere in it that you want. You don't have to start at level 1. If you've already been processed that, and you're at the stage where you feel guilty because you think you should help him get well, you can start there. But I still think the five tools are helpful throughout the process.
Can you talk a bit about the tools?
Well, the charting is where you begin.
Yeah.
So you can distance yourself and see what's going on, and stop listening to his version of what's going on, and look at what you're going through. And so you chart, and then I have guided journaling for you. And then you also get into the redefinition or the relabeling of things. Stop accepting their interpretations and look at what is it really? And then after that, we have some assertive training, but you don't want to do the assertiveness out loud at first.
Right.
That takes preparation. And of course, when you become assertive, he's going to get worse.
Yes.
So you become assertive in the space toward the end where what's going to happen, but you're prepared. But it just feels good to say it.
Yes.
It just feels good to stick up for yourself for a change.
Right. And so are you also all the way through encouraging them to develop a safety plan because of the danger of the rising intensity of the violence?
Yes, you have a safety plan. You also need to understand many women don't want to lie. They feel bad if they lie.
Yes.
But when you're dealing with a complicit individual, I say, would you lie to the prison guard to get out? Yes. If you had to, you would lie to the prison guard to get out. And they're so used to disclosing everything. It's like, no, don't tell him you're going to leave. Don't tell him where you're going to be. It just depends, but now, since the understanding of narcissism and sociopaths and psychopaths is better, you can sort which one is he and know what your chances are, because some are more prone to violence than others. And you have your years of experience with him, so you can tell. There's information on the web about telling whether or not he's going to do whatever. But basically, don't be alone with him. Always have people around.
Wow.
When you deal with him at that level, at the ending levels, don't stop believing he's a rational individual that
right.
You're not dealing with the normal marriage. And that's the other thing to understand is domestic abuse is not a marital counseling issue. The marriage is the setting in which it's being perpetrated, but it is not about the marriage. And the faith, it's not about the faith.
Right.
He doesn't give a rat's ass whether he's a Christian or whatever.
It's true.
He's just using it to keep you controlled.
Yes.
So understand it's not about your marriage. It's not about faith. These are tools and settings. And Marie Fortune and the Faith Trust Institute has materials for every single socioeconomic group: Native Americans, Muslims, everybody.
Wow. Okay.
She has resources for every group and resources for training leaders and people in the church to help them understand the lies under this, this being within their belief system.
So we will definitely provide a link in the show notes.
So, and then of course, now there's more agencies working with churches to try to make them safer places, but it's not going to address the foundations, which are to keep women controlled.
Right. Yeah. So
and these people say, well, the Catholic Church, no, never, because that's a pillar.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're about. You will never, ever have women included equally in the Catholic Church.
So have you seen a change or a progression in your own faith from having grown up in more of a fundamentalist ideology to, I mean, in our introduction, I mentioned that spiritual equality and inequality is something that's really important to you and on your radar. So your own faith has evolved in that sense.
Oh, it has to. Mm-hmm. That's the whole thing. You have to mature your ideas. Mm-hmm. You have to redefine. You have to understand this is not what it means. It's not what I was told it means. Mm-hmm. And so you do come out of it stronger. I think the most sinister aspect is in different denominations or approaches is the way you're taught to think. In Catholicism, I noticed a tendency to shut out reality or to call things what they're not. Mm-hmm. In the Catholic faith, I learned to call abnormal things normal and normal things abnormal.
Wow. Yes, that's
in
so
the
true.
In the fundamentalists, you've mentioned this, the magical thinking. Mm-hmm. The refusal to face things and look at them and work on them, and instead to retreat into magical thinking, retreat into projection. I say if your faith is creating a lot of fear, it's not a faith. It's not a good faith. I mean, fear is a negative form of faith. You're believing in the negative all the time. And this obsession with calling every new thing that comes along the devil in some of these systems is just absurd. Mm-hmm. And you have to look at that. They always have somebody to beat up on.
Yes.
They always have someone that you're supposed to feel superior to, mm-hmm. as long as you stay with us. Mm-hmm. So this, as I said, it divides families. It creates heartache. Mm-hmm. It is a negative. It's a tendency to pursue death rather than life. One of the things I read that was so helpful to me was by David E. Roberts. It's an old book in the 50s called Psychotherapy and Religion. However, it's still available. Okay. And he has the concept of dynamic versus static views of salvation. Mm-hmm. And in the static view of salvation, you essentially are not changed. You have to continue to look outside yourself to a savior. Mm-hmm. But you essentially yourself are not worthy. Mm-hmm. This is the view that allows groups to manipulate people. Mm-hmm. The dynamic view of salvation sees humans as created by a higher power, and the higher power is pleased to see them develop to their fullest capacity. Mm-hmm. It's a beneficial relationship.
It's entirely
a relationship based on health and growth and being the best human you can be. Mm. Versus the static view that says you were conceived in sin, you're born in sin, mm-hmm. You're never going to be anybody but a worm on the ground. Mm-hmm. And I still see this today. I see people going to church services where all they get is a whipping, basically. Mm-hmm. They go and they get their whipping. And then they come out feeling like they've gotten their whipping that they're supposed to have.
Wow.
So I just think it's extremely toxic. It's extremely dangerous. And I just mourn. I mourn for those who give themselves to that negative, death-focused approach.
Mm-hmm. And so when did you publish your workbook?
2018.
2018. Wow, that's not very long ago. How are you promoting it?
Well, I do trainings. I've had therapists. One therapist bought 5 copies.
Wonderful. Mm-hmm.
Because it's not easy. It's not an easy topic to deal with. It is compatible with 13 different modalities of counseling approaches, but a therapist, of course, does not want to jeopardize or feel like she's endangering a client's source of strength.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when that's contributing to the dysfunction, when those influences are detrimental and keeping her from living in her full humanity and honoring herself, is something that has to be looked at. But it's not easy to do that. And so this book, if you don't want to talk about it, or if a minister doesn't want to talk about it or doesn't know what to do, hand in the book. The Christians for Biblical Equality suggested to pastors that they just have some in their study. And when the women come, or have the pastoral care workers have it. I've trained pastoral care workers in it. But by all means, do not say, well, just pray about it. Cook better meals or whatever. The only minister that I encountered at that time when I was trying to get help was a gentleman who said, "Do you feel safe going home?" That was the best thing anybody could have said to me.
Right.
And he would bless his heart. And then I knew there was someone else that could take my husband, would know.
Yes.
Would know, a minister who would know. See, he would regard a minister, because his idea was nobody's worthy to tell me anything.
Right. Right.
But there was now a minister in a community that knew. So he had to tread a little more carefully because there was one more phone call to be made after the call to the minister, and that's the police.
Right.
So he had to tippy-toe a little more, but it was such a relief to me to have him say that to me.
What an important question. Do you feel safe?
I said, no, I don't feel safe going home.
Wow.
That was the first time I ever admitted that to anybody.
Powerful.
So the value of it was to me admitting it more than anything else.
Yes. Yes. And so that was another step in your journey away from the abuse.
But I think we see, and I don't want to get into politics, but I think we see the power of this thinking that's just not reality-based today. How dangerous it is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's threatening democracy. Yeah,
yes.
It's very concerning, and it's very widespread and pervasive. And as a counselor, one thing that we really do want to encourage is radical acceptance of reality, not as things we wish things would be or we hope things would be, but how things actually are, because it's only in that space that we have power to affect a change.
Yeah.
Wow. And I mean, women really are fighting an uphill battle in this sense, particularly women who've been raised and indoctrinated by fundamentalist religion that is so patriarchal and misogynistic. in its form and in its teaching.
Well, and you cannot do it alone. You have to hook up with other people that understand. Fortunately, today, it's not necessary to do it alone. There's a lot of people who do understand. Mm-hmm. There's counselors who understand. There's groups that understand. I did have a group of women try to help me from another area outside of town. Mm-hmm. A lot of times people are so socially phobic that if you're in the same area, but if they can help someone that they're not living near.
Right.
To give you an example of the bad thinking, one of the writers said that she saw a man chasing his wife, and she was questioning whether or not she should help because would she be doing God's will?
Oh dear.
This is the power of that thinking to keep people from living. Not even recognizing that they could help someone whose life was being threatened.
Wow.
Because of a doctrinal concern.
Yes. It's very convoluted.
It's just, and as long as they can keep people's minds focused on the doctrines.
Right.
And not the reality of the need in front of them, mm-hmm. where they could help without too much trouble. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had one librarian took us into her home 3 times.
Wow.
Her husband did not have a problem with that. But I know there are women who do not want to do that, and that's okay. You can still help. There are lots of ways you can still help.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Sorry, I want to make sure you have time to mention about your scholarship that you offer.
Oh, I will say that. But I've had pastors say it's not their job. It's not part of the church's function to help.
Wow.
And they give money to shelters. But it is your responsibility about what you teach. Mm-hmm. That is your responsibility. Yes. And 90% of the churches never address domestic abuse in a message.
That's right.
Or tell that that's not okay. So that is one area you could start right now.
Because they pretend it doesn't happen.
Yeah, the women in the church, you can stop shunning that woman. Mm-hmm. You could squeeze her hand. You could give her a hug. Mm-hmm. You could make a phone call and just listen. Just listen. Because if you listen long enough, if she talks long enough without any judgment being thrown back in her face, she's going to come up with her own solutions. She just needs someone standing with her.
Some support, yeah.
But I have, since I started this advocacy, I had the opportunity to offer a Thriver grant. And the RBB Thriver grant is an amount up to $1,000 for a woman who has left the situation, because the first year is always the hardest financially. And if she's a reader, if she's read the workbook, she can apply on the website, shirleyfessel.com, under grant. There's an application. And if she's selected, I award that grant in October, Domestic Abuse Awareness Month. Mm-hmm. And you're probably timing this because of that, Janice, because you're so smart. But anyway, I will be announcing, I have Facebook, Twitter, we have a presence there. I will be announcing the winner of the second annual RBB Thriver grant the first week of October.
Wonderful.
And so that just does a whole lot for me.
Mhm. Yes. And so
Because I
are you
know,
seeing a community has sprung up around the work that you're doing, a community of women supporting other women who are on this similar journey?
actually, you're kind of part of that. The presence on Twitter has been so wonderful because you find a lot of women who understand the advocates are on there. And as I said, I'm in contact with the advocate from the Southern Baptist Church. She's having a retreat for sexual abuse survivors of clergy in October, middle of October.
Mm-hmm.
And I've developed some things for use in that retreat.
Good.
But there's always a need for more community because people are struggling to build their own outreach.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're not able to collaborate as much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fairly fortunate to have had years behind me now, and I don't need financially or otherwise to, have an empire or anything.
Right.
So I'm always open to more collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so grateful for this opportunity that you're providing me.
Mm-hmm.
And always willing to be of any help that I can.
Oh, this is just wonderful.
But I do, to any woman out there that might be listening,
mm-hmm.
I do understand.
Mm.
And I think Janice understands.
Mm-hmm.
And feel free to email or contact me on my website.
Yes.
Twitter. You can usually find me under Fess Up Something, Shirley Fessel, or you can find me under Redemption from Biblical Battering.
Mm-hmm. And so your website is shirleyfessel.com.
Yes.
And on Twitter, you're at FessUp2 and at RedemptionBB, as in Redemption from Biblical Battering. It's so important to me, your message. I'm really thrilled that you were able to come and talk to me today. And so some of my followers may wonder about why an atheist and someone who's very, who works hard in the religious trauma recovery community would be interested in your workbook, which is a faith-based path to freedom. But I'm not just an atheist. I am a humanist. I believe in helping other people. And this is a very underserved demographic of humans who need help and are worthy of help. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and I'm quite happy to collaborate with you and point people to your website. I'd love to see a copy of your workbook in every pastor's office at every church. I just think it's really necessary. So thank you very much, Shirley, for the work that you're doing.
Well,
it's
thank
really
you, Janice. And I think it starts, unfortunately, when a woman is challenged in this way, it starts a search. Mm-hmm. And in that search, she starts uncovering a lot of the false foundations. So that helps her. That helps her live freely.
Yes. Oh, well, I just encourage people to visit shirleyfessel.com. Fessel is FESSEL.com. And we'll have some more links in the show notes. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in today. I want to remind you, go to the YouTube channel, Conference on Religious Trauma. Subscribe to that channel, and then you'll never miss an alert for episodes that come out of the Divorcing Religion podcast. And thanks again to my special guest, Shirley.
Thank you, Janice.